They say you can measure a man by what he leaves behind. In the town of Sable Creek, in the burnt dry summer of 1887, a young cowboy named Eli Marsh was owed 3 months of honest pay. What he got instead was a half-blind donkey, so old, so sway-backed, so plainly finished, that grown men stopped what they were doing to laugh out loud when he led it down the street. They called the animal useless. They called him a fool for taking it. But that donkey was carrying something nobody in that thirsty, dying town could have guessed, a secret that had been buried for 2 years under the dust and the silence, a truth that would drag the richest, proudest man in the whole county down to the floor of his own bank and bring water back to a place that had forgotten the sound of it. I know all this because I was there. I shod that broken donkey's worn-out hooves with these 2 hands, and I'm the man who wrote the whole thing down, the way I write everything down. So stay with me, sit close, because by the time we're done here, you are never going to hear the word useless the same way again. The first thing I remember is the laughing. I had my back to the street, bent over the left forefoot of Del Surratt's bay gelding, a mouthful of horseshoe nails the way a man my age shouldn't have, when the sound rolled up the road and made me lift my head. Big laughing, the mean kind, the kind that isn't really about anything funny. I spat the nails into my apron pocket and stepped to the door of the forge. There came Eli Marsh down the middle of Sable Creek's only street, his hat in one hand and a rope in the other, and on the end of that rope was the sorriest animal I had seen in 40 years of working with animals. A donkey, gray going to white around the muzzle the way they do. One eye clouded over the color of dishwater, the other not much better. Hip bones you could have hung a coat on. It walked with a hitch in the off hind leg and its head down low, and its long ears, those ridiculous, beautiful ears a donkey has, drooped flat back against its neck like it knew, like it understood every word those men were throwing. That your inheritance, Marsh. Calloway's men were on the porch of the drovers, beer in hand at 10 in the morning, and one of them, Prout, I think, near fell off the rail. Old Petrie pay you in that. 3 months' work, another one howled, and he gives you a dead donkey that don't know it's dead yet. Eli didn't answer. He kept walking, but I watched his jaw and I saw it working under the skin, the muscle there jumping, and I saw his ears go red at the tops. He was 22 years old that summer, maybe 23, lean as a fence rail with a face that hadn't decided yet whether it was going to be a hard face or a kind one. Life was still voting on that question. He stopped in front of my forge because there was nowhere else to stop. The whole town was on that one street. "Tom," he said to me, just that, "Tom." "Eli." I looked at the donkey. The donkey looked back at me with that one ruined eye, and I swear to you it sighed. A long, whole-body sigh, like a man easing down into a chair he never expects to get up out of again. "That's a Pell donkey," I said. He blinked. "A what?" "A Sappels, the prospector. Died a couple winters back out past the Calicos." I crouched down, my knees told me about it, and ran my hand along that swayback spine, feeling the bones. This here was his burro. Carried his whole outfit for 15 years easy. Name of Solomon. I'd shod that animal back when it could still see and still pull. "How in the world you come by a Sappels donkey?" Eli's face did something complicated. "Petrie," he said. "I've been working the Petrie spread since March. He's been telling me week after week, money's coming, the bank's slow, the cattle market's down." His voice was flat, the way a man's voice gets when he's holding something heavy and doesn't want you to see his arm shaking. "This morning I went up to settle. He's sick, Tom, real sick, lying in that bed all yellow, and he won't look at me, and he says he hasn't got it. Says he never had it. Says Calloway's got a lien on every dollar he owns and there's nothing left." Eli swallowed. "And then he says, take the donkey. It's all that's free and clear. Take the donkey and we're square." Behind us on the porch the laughing was still going, slower now, settling into chuckles, a snake settling after it strikes. "And you took it," I said. "What else was I gonna take?" He looked at me, and now I could see the thing under the flatness, and it was not anger. Anger would have been easier. It was shame, plain shame, hot and helpless. I got $2.40, Tom. I came to this country with a bedroll and my daddy's broke watch, and I was going to send for my sister soon as I had a stake. He laughed, but it cracked in the middle. I've been adding it up in my head the whole walk here. 3 months, sun up to past dark. Branding, fencing, pulling calves out of mud. And I'm walking home with a donkey that can't see and a watch that can't tell time. I want you to understand something about Eli Marsh, and I'm going to say it now even though I didn't have the words for it then. There were men in that town, grown men, men with families and standing, who would have burned the Petrie barn down for less. Who'd have at least cursed, at least kicked something, at least made a scene to save their pride. Eli just stood there in the road, holding the rope of a dying donkey, and tried not to let me see his eyes go wet. That was the first thing I wrote down about him, that night, in the ledger I keep. I should explain about the ledger, since we'll be living in it a while. I'm the farrier in Sable Creek. Was anyhow Tom Hargrove, 61 years old that summer and feeling everyone. And I keep a book, not the kind you'd think, not money owed and money paid, though I keep one of those too for the business. The other one, the one my late wife used to tease me about. In it I write down a different kind of debt. Who did what to who owed what that money can't square. I started it after the war when I learned that the world keeps no accounts of its own and somebody ought to. Most of those debts never get paid. I write them anyway. I figure it matters that somebody saw. So that first night I lit a candle and I wrote, "The town of Sable Creek owes Eli Marsh 3 months of honest labor, paid in laughter and a blind donkey. Witnessed." I didn't know yet how that account was going to come due. Lord, if I'd known. Now I have to tell you about the water, because nothing in Sable Creek made sense without it, and nothing in this story does either. We were dying. That's the plain truth of it. The creek that gave the town its name had run dust for 2 summers running. The clouds would build up purple and beautiful over the calicos in the afternoons, and then just leave. Drift off east to drop their rain on someone else's prayers. The wells in town had gone brackish and low, and you'd lower a bucket 60 feet and bring up a quart of water that tasted like a rusty spoon. Except for one well. Vincent Calloway's. Calloway owned the deep artesian well on the south edge of town, the only reliable water for 30 miles, and Calloway owned the bank. And between those two facts he owned just about everything else by degrees. He sold water by the barrel. A man could keep his garden alive, his stock alive, his children alive, but it cost. And every month it cost a little more, and every month a few more families couldn't pay, and Calloway would buy their failing land for pennies, kind as you please, doing them a favor. He had a way of doing favors that left you poorer and grateful at the same time. I've known a few men like that. They're worse than the ones who just take. He was a tall, soft-spoken man, Calloway, always dressed like Sunday. He'd touch his hat to the women and remember the children's names and lend a dying rancher just enough rope. I used to watch him walk down that street like he owned the dust in the air, and I'd think, somebody ought to write you down. So I did. He had 3 full pages in my book by that summer. What I'm telling you is, the donkey didn't just walk into a poor town. It walked into a town with its throat being slowly squeezed shut, and a man's hand on the squeezing, and everybody too scared and too thirsty to do anything but watch. Hold on to that. It matters where the water came in. Eli took the donkey out to the little patch of nothing he was renting east of town, a fallen-in-line shack, and an acre of hardpan that the previous tenant had given up on. He had no money for feed. I know because I gave him a sack of oats that week and told him it was payment for some sweeping he'd done around the forge, which was a lie, and he knew it was a lie, and he took it anyway because he had to. Pride is a luxury. And Eli had spent his last of it in the road that morning. The first strange thing happened maybe 4 days later. He came into the forge in the afternoon, dust to the knees, and there was something in his face I hadn't seen there before. Not happiness. Eli wasn't built for happiness, not yet, but a kind of puzzlement that had pushed the shame off to one side. "Tom," he said, "that donkey's not right. It's near 20 years old and half blind, Eli. Course it's not right." "No." He sat down on the anvil stump, turning his hat in his hands the way he did. "I mean, it does a thing. Every day about the same time, late afternoon. It pulls. Hard as it can, which ain't hard, but it tries, always the same way. South and west, toward the Calicos. I had it staked out, and it dragged the stake clean out of the ground and started walking. I found it half a mile off, just standing. Standing in the middle of the flats with its nose down, breathing at the dirt. I didn't think much of it, I'll be honest. Donkeys are funny, I said. It's an old trail animal. Probably smells a Sapel's old camp, they'll do that. Go back to a place they know." "Maybe." He didn't look convinced. "It paws too, same spot sort of, not the exact same but the same direction, paws at the ground and brays this awful broke down bray like it's calling something." He shook his head. "It about breaks my heart, Tom. It's an old broke animal that won the booby prize of a life, and it still gets up every afternoon and tries to go somewhere." He laughed that cracked laugh again. "I named it. After a Sa, I guess. I've been calling it Solomon, like you said." "Asa called it that. The wise king. Asa always said that donkey knew things he didn't. I'd forgotten that until I said it. A Sapel, dead 2 years, a stooped old desert rat who came into town maybe 4 times a year to buy beans and tobacco and talk to no one. He'd had that donkey and a beat-up Apache pack rig and a way of disappearing into the Calicos for months. Folks figured he died out there alone. Calloway's men had found the donkey wandering the foothills the next spring, half-starved, and brought it in, and somewhere in the 2 years since it had ended up in Petrie's pasture, eating Petrie's grass, until it became the only thing Petrie had that wasn't already mortgaged to Calloway. I want you to notice something, and I didn't notice it for weeks, fool that I am. Calloway's men found that donkey, out in the foothills, near wherever a Sapel died. But that's getting ahead. The hard part of part 1, and there's always a hard part, isn't there, came at the end of that first month. Eli ran out of oats, out of money, out of road. The sister he was trying to send for Nell, 14, back in Missouri with an aunt who didn't want her, wrote him a letter that he showed me in a careful child's hand, asking when he was going to come. Asking was the West as pretty as folks said. He read it to me standing right there, and his voice didn't make it to the end. And a man came out to the line shack. One of Calloway's, not Calloway himself, he never did his own asking. A fellow named Risk, who ran cattle and dealt in this and that, including, it turned out, hides and bone and rendered fat. He'd heard there was a young feller out east of town with an old donkey he couldn't feed. He offered Eli $3 for it. For the hide and the rest, he meant. For what an old, useless donkey was worth dead, which is more than it's worth alive when you're starving. $3. You have to understand what $3 was to Eli Marsh that week. It was Nell's stage fare, near enough. It was feed and a fresh start and the difference between making it and not. It was the first time since the road that the world had offered him anything but a closed fist. And all he had to do was hand over the rope. He told me about it later, and this is the part I wrote down in big letters, pressing so hard I tore the page. He said the donkey was standing there the whole time, down by the dead corral in the late light, and Risk was talking, easy and reasonable, doing the kindly favor voice they all had in that town, and Eli had his hand on the rope, and he had Nell's letter in his shirt pocket, and he was so hungry he could feel his own heartbeat in his teeth. And the donkey turned its head, slow, and looked at him with that one ruined eye. "It wasn't asking me not to," Eli said. "That's the thing, Tom. It wasn't begging. It just looked at me, like it had already been let down by everybody it ever trusted, and it was just waiting to see if I was going to be one more." He pressed the heel of his hand against his eye. "A Sapel raised it from a colt, and it carried that old man for 15 years, and then he died, and they left it out there to starve, and then they sold it around like a busted chair. And here I am, the last fool at the end of the line, about to sell it to the bone man. He was quiet a long moment. I told Risk no, he said. I don't even know why. I have nothing. But I looked at that donkey and I thought somebody in this animal's whole life has got to keep their word to it, just once, even if it kills us both. Risk laughed at him, said he was as big a fool as the town said the offer wouldn't stand, and to come crawling to Calloway when the donkey died on its own and he had nothing to show for it. And then Risk rode off, and Eli sat down in the dirt next to that old gray animal as the sun went down, the two of them with nothing in the world, and Solomon lowered his head and pressed his soft muzzle against the boy's shoulder and stood there. Just stood there with him. I wrote that night, Eli Marsh, hungry, refused $3 and his sister's stage fare to keep faith with a half-blind donkey. Witnessed, I do not yet understand it. I didn't understand it. But the donkey knew something. The donkey had been trying to tell us for a month, pulling southwest every afternoon toward the Calicos, pawing at the same patch of empty ground, braying that broke-down call at the dirt. It wasn't lost, it wasn't senile, it wasn't going back to a dead man's camp. It was trying to take us to the water. What broke it open was the boots. I have to back up half a step. After the night with Risk and the $3, I couldn't leave it be. Some men can let a thing sit. I never could. It's why my wife loved me and why she was tired all the time. So I told Eli to bring the donkey to the forge. Its hooves were a disgrace, long and split and curling, the feet of an animal nobody had bothered with in 2 years. I'd trim them and shoe what could be shod, and I'd not charge him, and I'd hear no argument. He brought Solomon in on a gray morning, and while I had that off hind foot up in my lap, rasping it down, I found it. There was something wedged up in the cleft of the frog, packed hard with 2 years of dirt and pitch. I dug it out with my hoof knife thinking it was a stone. It wasn't a stone. It was a brass button, government issue, the kind off a soldier's coat or a fancy man's, and scratched into the back of it the way a bored man scratches at metal with a knife of a long evening were 2 letters, VC. I sat there with that button in my black old hand, and I felt the morning go cold. Tom, Eli said, what is it? I didn't answer right off. I was doing arithmetic I didn't want to do. A Sapel dies alone out past the Calicos. Calloway's men find the donkey the next spring in the foothills, half-starved. 2 years of dirt packs a brass button up into a donkey's foot. V.C. Vincent Calloway. Eli, I said slow, where exactly did Solomon keep trying to go? You said southwest. Could you walk it? He looked at me funny. I could follow him. He knows the way better'n me. So that's what we did. God help us, 2 grown men and a blind donkey, on a Sunday when the town was at the one church that still had a roof. We let Solomon out and we followed him. I wish I could tell you it was a long, noble journey. It was about 4 miles, and it took us most of the morning because the old donkey had to rest, and twice he lost the thread and stood confused and trembling until something, a smell, a slope, some memory in his old gray bones caught hold again and pulled him on. We went southwest into the broken country at the foot of the Calicos, into a maze of dry washes and red rock that all looks the same to a man, and apparently does not look the same at all to a donkey who has walked it 1,000 times with a dead man on the lead. And Solomon brought us to a place, a narrow side canyon, shaded, with a great slab of pale rock fallen across the bottom of it. He walked right up to that slab and put his nose against it and brayed that long broke call and pawed at the base of it, at a place where the sand was strangely dark. Eli knelt down and dug with his hands. A foot down, the sand was wet. Wet. In Sable Creek. In the 3rd summer of the drought, 4 miles from a town selling water by the barrel, this old animal had brought us to wet sand under a fallen rock. It's a spring, I breathed. There's a spring under there. Somebody capped it. Somebody rolled this slab, and I looked at that slab, 8 feet of solid rock, and I knew no one rolled it by hand. Somebody blasted this down on top of it. Eli's face had gone white under the dust. Why would anybody? And then I told him about the button. VC and I watched him do the same cold arithmetic I'd done in the forge, and I watched a boy turn into something harder right in front of me. Because here's what we were both seeing. If there was good water out here, sweet artesian water, free for the digging, then Calloway's well in town was worth nothing. His whole empire. The barrels he sold, the land he bought off dying families, the favors that left men grateful and broke. All of it stood on one thing, that his water was the only water. And if old Asapel, the desert rat, the prospector, had found this, a spring out in the open country with no man's name on it, that anyone could file a claim to or simply use. He knew, Eli said quietly. Asa knew, that's why he died out here. He looked at the donkey, and Solomon was there. I'm going to tell you the thing we found that made it real, and then I'm going to tell you about the worst choice I ever watched a man make, and how he made it the right way. We searched that canyon the rest of the day, and up under a ledge in a dry crack where a careful old man might cache the things he couldn't carry, wrapped in oilcloth and hide, we found Asapel's pack rig. The old Apache-made pack saddle the donkey had carried 15 years. Calloway's men had stripped the gear off the animal when they found it but left the rig. What's an old pack saddle worth? Nothing. Useless. And so they left it, and somewhere along the line it ended up cached here, or Asa had cached it himself before whatever happened. And sewn flat into the lining of that old pack saddle, where the leather was double thick across the bars, was a folded oilskin packet. Inside, a hand-drawn map of the canyon and the spring marked careful as a Bible verse, a letter in Asa's cramped hand, and a single sheet official stamped a claim. A water claim, filed legal at the Territorial Land Office in the spring of 1885, 2 years before, naming the spring, describing its location by section and range, and granting Asapel and his heirs and assigns the rights to it. And this was the part that made my hands shake, designating, in Asa's own added words, that upon his death the water was to be held in common for the use of the town of Sable Creek and all its people, free of any toll forever. The old hermit who talked to nobody, the man we all thought was a crazy desert rat. He'd found the one thing that could save the town, and he'd given it to us, to people who'd never given him so much as a kind word. He'd filed it legal and written it down so that no Calloway could ever own it, and then he'd. The letter told the rest. I won't read it all to you. Some things are between a dead man and whoever finds his last words, but the shape of it was this. Asa had let it slip once in town, a word too many to the wrong man over a drink, and Calloway had come to see him. Calloway had offered to buy the claim quiet for what passed as a fortune to an old prospector, and Asa, God love him, had said no, had said the water belonged to the town, had said it wasn't his to sell. And then Asapel, who knew that desert like his own hand, had turned up dead, alone, and his donkey had been found wandering the foothills with a brass button worked into its hoof. VC. We never could prove the last part. I want to be honest with you. A button isn't a confession. A canyon doesn't testify. To this day I can't swear in a court what happened to Asapel out there. But I know what I believe, and I know that donkey was there for it. Solomon was there. And for 2 years that old blind animal had been trying, every single afternoon, to drag somebody, anybody, back to the water and the rig and the truth, and nobody had bothered to follow a useless donkey. Until Eli Marsh kept his word to it. Now the choice. We rode back into town in the last light, the two of us and the donkey and the oilskin packet inside Eli's shirt against his skin. And somewhere on that ride it came clear to both of us, the thing that packet meant, and it was bigger than the town. Because that claim named Asapel's heirs, and Asa had no kin, no wife, no child, no soul on this earth. The claim, the spring, the water, by law and by the look of it, that was up for grabs by whoever held the paper and filed the transfer. And Eli held the paper. He could have owned it. Do you see? He could have ridden to the land office and filed it to himself and become, overnight, the man who owned the only sweet water for 30 miles in a country dying of thirst. He could have out-Callowayed Calloway. He could have sent for Nell first class and built a house with glass windows and never been laughed at in that street again. 3 months of stolen wages, a blind donkey, a sister he couldn't afford, and the whole thing flipped. The bottom man suddenly the top, and not a thing illegal about it. I watched him understand that. I watched it land on him on that dark ride. And here is what I want you to know about Eli Marsh. The thing I'd been trying to write down right since that first morning in the road, and finally had the words for. He pulled up his horse. We were on the rise above town, the few lights of Sable Creek scattered out below, dim because lamp oil cost money too. And he took out the packet and he looked at it a long time in the dark. I keep thinking about the part Asa wrote, he said finally, free of any toll forever. He turned to me. Tom, this town laughed at me, took my pay, took my work, watched Calloway squeeze the life out of half the families on that street and didn't say boo. I don't owe Sable Creek a thing. By rights I should own them. They deserve it. They would, I said. I wasn't going to lie to him. Every word's true. And I got a sister I can't feed. You do? He looked back at the lights, and I'll be honest, I didn't know which way he'd go, and I'm not sure I'd have blamed him much either way. A starving man with a fortune in his shirt, that's not a test God should hand anybody. That ain't what Asa wanted, Eli said, so quiet I barely heard it. And it ain't what the donkey's been breaking its heart to show us. It wasn't taking us to money, Tom. It was taking us to water for everybody. He folded the packet back up. Asa kept his word to this town and it cost him his life. The donkey kept faith for 2 years for nothing. I'm not, his voice caught, I'm not gonna be the one link in this chain that breaks it. I'm not gonna be a Calloway. I'd rather stay poor. I have shod 1,000 horses and buried a wife and watched a war. And I have not before or since been as proud of another human soul as I was of that hungry, ruined boy on that dark rise, choosing the town's water over his own salvation. We made a plan that night. We'd file the claim exactly as Asa wrote it in common for the town, free forever. And then we'd do the thing that scared us both worse than poverty. We'd tell everybody, out loud, in daylight, with Calloway standing right there. It was a Saturday when it happened, because Saturday was when the town came in, and we wanted the town. I need to set it for you. The street full, wagons, horses at the rail, women at the dry goods, men loafing in the shade, children underfoot. The drover's porch full of Calloway's men. And Calloway himself, as it happened, out front of his bank in his Sunday clothes, talking soft and pleasant to the Ferris family, who were about to lose their place, about to take one of his favors, Mrs. Ferris with her hands knotted in her apron, and the 3 children too quiet beside her. And down the street came Eli Marsh, leading a half-blind donkey. The laughing started up out of habit before they even knew what was happening. Prude on the porch, here comes the rancher and his racehorse, and a few others taking it up, easy and cruel, the way that town had 100 times. Eli walked into the middle of the street and stopped. He had a Saz oilskin packet in his hand. And I want you to know that boy was shaking. I was 3 feet off. I'd come to stand with him, my ledger under my arm, and I could see him shaking, and he did it anyway. That's the only kind of brave that counts, the shaking kind. My name's Eli Marsh, he said, loud as he could make it. His voice cracked and he pushed through it. Most of you laughed at me a month back. Petrie paid me 3 months' wages with this donkey here, and you all thought that was about the funniest thing you ever saw. The laughing trailed off. People do quiet down when a man names his own shame in the street. It's an uncomfortable thing to watch. This donkey belonged to a sapel, Eli went on, the prospector, the one we all figured for a crazy old hermit, the one that died out in the Calicos 2 summers ago alone and nobody so much as said a prayer over. He held up the packet. Before he died, a sapel found water, a spring, Good sweet water 4 miles southwest of this town, free and open on territory land, and he filed a legal claim on it. Eli's voice, steadied now, found its iron. And in that claim he gave it away, to us, to Sable Creek, to be held in common for every man, woman, and child in this town, free of any toll. Those are his words, forever. The street had gone dead silent. Even the children felt it. There is good water, Eli said into that silence, 4 miles from here, that none of us has to buy. And then a strange thing happened. I'd half expected cheering. There wasn't any, not yet, because every soul on that street in the same breath turned and looked at one man. Vincent Calloway. He'd gone the color of tallow. He stood there in front of his bank with the Ferris family forgotten beside him, and for the first time in the years I'd watched him, the soft, pleasant mask was just gone, and you could see the thing underneath, and it was afraid. Because a man whose whole kingdom is built on owning the only water, that man has no kingdom at all the moment there's water for free. That's a forgery, Calloway said, but his voice came out wrong, too fast, too high. That old fool never filed any. It's stamped by the Territorial Land Office, I said. I stepped up beside Eli and opened my mouth for the first time, and I am not ashamed to say my old voice rang in that street. Spring of '85. Anybody can ride to the county seat and confirm it. It's real, Vincent. I looked him dead in the eye. And I've got a question for you while we're all here in the daylight. Your men found a Sapel's donkey in the foothills the spring after he died. How'd it come to have one of your buttons worked into its hoof, 4 miles from a spring somebody blasted shut? I held up the brass button, VC glinting in the sun. I told you a button's not a confession. I'll tell you again. We never proved a thing in any court. But there are courts and there are courts, and the one that mattered that morning was the one made of every face on that street, turning slow toward Vincent Calloway, and doing the same cold arithmetic Eli and I had done, the dead prospector, the capped spring, the squeezed dry town, the favors, the land bought cheap, and arriving all at once all together at the same place. I have never seen a man fall so far, so fast, standing perfectly still. He tried to talk. Nobody listened. He looked around for his men, and his men were looking at the ground, because the thing about hired loyalty is it's only ever rented, and the rent had just come due. And then Mrs. Ferris, quiet Mrs. Ferris, who'd been about to sign her home away, Mrs. Ferris stepped back away from him like he was a snake on the path, and pulled her children with her, and that was the moment the street turned. I won't tell you they hung him. They didn't. We weren't that kind of town, or maybe we were just too thirsty to do anything but ride for the water. Calloway was gone within the week, gone in the night, ahead of the questions, ahead of the territorial marshal Eli'd sent a letter to. His bank failed. His land claims unwound. The favors came undone. The last I heard of Vincent Calloway, he was a clerk in a freight office 2 territories over. And I hope every cup of water he ever drank after that tasted like that rusty spoon. We dug out the spring. The whole town. That's the picture I keep, more than Calloway's white face. The whole of Sable Creek, men and women and children, 4 miles out in the broken country, levering that great pale slab of rock aside with poles and chains and a borrowed mule team. It took 2 days. And when the last of it shifted and rolled, the water came up clear, came up cold, came up out of the dark ground like it had been waiting 2 years just for permission, and there was a sound from those people I'll hear till I die. Not a cheer, a kind of cry. The sound thirsty people make when the thing they'd stopped letting themselves hope for comes true after all. Children put their whole faces in it. Grown men wept and pretended it was dust. Mrs. Ferris filled her cupped hands and held them to her littlest one's mouth and couldn't speak. And Eli Marsh stood off to the side, with the donkey, and watched. He never took $1 of it. The claim went on the town books exactly as Asa wrote it. Free of toll forever. The council voted Eli a piece of land for his trouble, good land, with the new water rights, and he took that finally, and he sent for Nell, and she came west that autumn and grew up to be the school teacher. But that's another story and a happy one, and you don't need me for it. The donkey, though. I have to tell you about the donkey, because that's where this account closes, and it doesn't close the neat way you might want it to. Solomon never saw the water come up. I want to be careful how I say this. He brought us the whole way 4 miles, 2 years, every broke-down afternoon, and we got the rock moved on the second day late, and the old donkey was there, standing at the head of the canyon where he'd stood 1,000 times for a dead man. But that morning, the second morning, before the slab finally turned, Eli came to find me at the forge first thing, and his face told me before his mouth did. Solomon had laid down in the night in the corral by the line shack, the way old animals do when they've decided. Eli had sat with him, had his hand on that gray neck at the end. He told me the donkey was quiet and not afraid, and that just before he'd lifted his head once and turned his good ear toward the southwest, toward the canyon, toward the water, toward the thing he'd been trying to give us the whole time, and then he'd put it down again, and that was all. He didn't see the water come up. He'd done the carrying, he didn't need to see it. We buried him out at the spring. Eli wouldn't have it any other way, and nobody argued, and there's a flat stone there now that I cut and lettered myself, and it doesn't say useless, I can tell you that. It says his name in one line, and the line is a sapels, free of any toll forever. I figured the donkey earned the old man's words as much as the old man did. I'm an old man now myself. The water still runs sweet. I drank from it this very morning before I sat down to tell you this. The town never did go back to being kind, not all the way, towns don't, but it remembers. Once a year on the day the rock turned, somebody walks out to that stone with a bucket and pours fresh water over it, and I don't entirely know why, and I've stopped asking. Some debts you can't square. You just keep marking that they're owed. I wrote the last of it in my ledger that night. 2 years' worth of account finally closed, and I'll give you the words I used, because they're the truest I ever set down, and I'd rather end on them than on anything of my own making. A poor cowboy was paid with a useless donkey. The donkey carried the whole town's life in its broke-down bones for 2 years and never once was thanked, and brought us home to the water, and laid down the morning it ran. Witnessed by Tom Hargrove, who was wrong about a great many things, and grateful in the end to have lived long enough to learn it.